first time in a long, eventful and glorious history, the Princess of Wales came to Tibworth on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen to present a new guidon to the 30th 18th Royal Hussars, Queen Mary's Own. The guidon of a cavalry regiment incorporates into one symbol the honour, the history and the traditions of that regiment. Originally used as conspicuous rallying points in battle, a guidon was carried by a banneret, who, when created a knight, cut off the points of his guidon to create a standard. In the middle of the 19th century, guidons were replaced by drum banners, carried on the kettle drums of the drum horse of the old mounted cavalry bands. Both carried the battle honours awarded to the regiment following successive campaigns since its formation. The ancestors of the officers and men paraded today to represent the regiment go back 272 years to the Jacobite rebellions. In 1715, the 13th Hussars were raised by Brigadier Richard Munden. They were originally called Munden's Dragoons. Back in action again during the Second Jacobite Rebellion in 1742, this fine silver centrepiece depicts the death of the commanding officer, Colonel James Gardner, at the Battle of Preston Pans. The 18th Hussars were raised in Ireland by Charles Moore, the 6th Earl of Drogheda, in 1754. Originally called the Drogheda Light Horse, then the 19th Light Dragoons, the title reverted to the 18th Light Dragoons until 1805. Both the 13th and the 18th saw active service together in Jamaica in 1775, before joining forces again in the Peninsular War. Here they were under Arthur Wellesley, who had been gazetted into the 18th as a lieutenant, and who later commanded the Allied forces at the Battle of Waterloo and became the Duke of Wellington. The 13th Light Dragoons next saw action in the Crimea after 21 years of peace, serving in India and a further 14 in the United Kingdom. It is for the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava that the regiment is most proudly remembered. Mustering only 8 officers and 100 men, the 13th Light Dragoons, on the right of the first line, charged the Russian guns and cavalry with the 17th Lancers and the 11th, 4th and 8th Hussars. During the battle, and for his conspicuous gallantry rescuing a wounded 17th Lancer officer, Lance Sergeant Malone and 2 other 17th 21st NCOs were awarded 3 of the first 7 Victoria Crosses ever given. An affiliation with the Force Chasseurs d'Afrique also dates from these exploits in the Valley of Death and the charge of the 600. The 18th Hussars, disbanded after the Napoleonic Wars, reformed at York in 1858, thus starting a connection with Yorkshire which continues to this day. The modern regiment recruits the majority of its soldiers from the old mining and steel towns and cities of South Yorkshire, Sheffield and North Humberside. In 1876, Lord Baden-Powell was gazetted to the 13th as a lieutenant, starting a link with the regiment that was to continue until his death. The 2 regiments found themselves again in action in South Africa in 1899. The 13th Hussars saw continuous action, particularly in the relief of Ladysmith, when under the command of Baden-Powell, they relieved the besieged garrison, which included the 18th Hussars. In recognition for their services in the Boer War, the 18th Hussars was granted the title Princess of Wales's Own, this being changed in 1910 to Queen Mary's Own. On a nostalgic trip to South Africa some years later, Captain Neve discovered in a market 3 regimental horses, one of which, Caprice, had a foal. This famous mare and foal has since been transformed many times into silver and bronze, as presents and as a racing trophy. The hoof of Caprice today sits on the commanding officer's desk. The 18th Hussars were engaged throughout the war in France. They fought first as mounted and later as infantry. The part they played can be judged from the many battle honours as well as the title Royal granted after the end of hostilities. The 13th Hussars won further glory in Mesopotamia, taking part in the famous charge against a brigade of Turkish infantry at the Battle of Lage and again at Richardson's Bluff. The 13th 18th Hussars were amalgamated at Aldershot on the 9th of November 1922. Her Majesty Queen Mary became Colonel-in-Chief, and now Lieutenant General Lord Baden-Powell as the Colonel of the regiment. The interwar years were largely uneventful. 7 years in Aldershot, Edinburgh and Shorncliffe, 2 years in Egypt, and 10 years in India. In India, an affiliation was forged with the Skinner's Horse. The last drum banners the regiment received were presented by Lord Baden-Powell at Sialkot at the last full-mounted parade. In 1939, the regiment returned to England and was mechanised. Her Royal Highness is greeted by the Lord Lieutenant of Hampshire. The second in command of the mounted escort is Sergeant Allchurch. The mounted escort is commanded by Captain Simon Ledger.